Okay, so
Mhm.
let's jump into the experience and do our best to introduce people to it.
Hmm.
How do you instruct someone who is contemplating this for the first time?
Yes. Well, I could just take you and them or whatever
Yeah,
through just a
please.
little process that includes closed eyes
Mm-hmm.
and, being aware that we're just audio here. Okay. Well, as you say, a lot of the experiments are visual, and you can just notice you can't see your face now. But a very simple, direct thing to do, which I think is worth doing, is to actually point. So if the listener is willing to play a bit, I would ask you just to get your index finger of your right hand or something and point out. So you've actually got to do it because it's just making clear the arrow of attention is out. So you might be pointing at the table or a vase or a window, and you're looking along your finger, and there's a thing. Now, what I want you to do is just turn your finger 180 degrees around to point back at the place you're looking out of. And notice what you see there or what you don't see. Because I don't see anything right now. I don't see my face, don't see my eyes, don't see any shape or movement or anything. So I'm pointing, I would say I'm pointing at my no face, at this space here, this stillness, this silence even. And this outward and inward is a two-way pointing thing. So that's a kind of useful gesture to bear in mind.
Mm.
So just starting visually, I'd say, well, you can't see your face. I'd say the inward pointing arrow of attention is pointing at nothing, space. Now, this is a nonverbal experience, so I'm putting words on it. I'm absolutely convinced everyone is aware, can see this because you can't see your head. Instead, you see the world. But you may choose different words from me, so that we accept that. So I'd just like you first to notice several things about the view out from this space. That it's a sort of oval view, the field of view, and it fades out all the way around. So whatever you're looking at is most in focus. And then when you get to the edge, as it were, it fades out, and then you can see nothing around it. And I take that seriously. It's sort of hanging in nowhere. The view, there's nothing above it, nothing below it, nothing this side of it. It's just hanging in space. And it's single. So if you look at any two objects, you say, well, that one's bigger than that. You can compare the size. It's relative. I say now, look at the whole view. How big is it? And there isn't a second one to compare it with. So I can't say how big it is. And so the two things to notice here, well, two or three. One, it's single, the view out. I might hear about your view, but I don't experience it. In my own experience, like you say in the app, is a matter of experience. There's just one view. It fades out into nothing. It's not inside anything. I can't say how big it is. Now, close your eyes. See? Now, so you've got a kind of darkness, which, again, is in your app. As you say, it's kind of lit up. It's not just nothing. There's something there. Let's call it darkness. It's not uniform darkness. Now, how big is that darkness? Well, there isn't a second one to compare it with. It's single, so I can't say. And is it inside anything? Well, just like the visual view, no, I could say it's in space or awareness or consciousness. Now I move my attention to sounds, and I hear this voice coming and going and other sounds. So if I use the same kind of words, the field of sound, like the field of vision, that's all the sounds. How big is it? Well, there isn't a second one to compare it with. And is it inside anything? No. Or I say it's in silence. So these sounds are coming out of the silence, going back in. And I think you see here, developing the first person language. I am the space in which the darkness is happening. I am the silence in which the sounds are happening. Now I move my attention to body sensations. And if I put aside my memory, my sort of map, and just go by the sensation, See, lots of different sensations. Now, how big is the whole field of sensation? Well, there isn't a second one to compare it with. It's single. See, I can't say how big it is. And is it inside everything? In this awareness. Now, I identify with my body sensations often enough. So if I say that I can't say how big the field of sensation is, I can say, I can't say how big I am. I'm not inside anything. Yes, I'm single, I'm alone. And then finally we can move our attention to thoughts and feelings. So think of a number, there's a thought, you see, and think of the face of a friend and the affection you feel, feelings, see, or anything, problem and anxiety that comes up, challenge you've got. Now, how big is this very complicated field of mind? Well, I don't experience a second one to compare it with. See? And where is it? Well, I think as the Zen people say, it's in no mind, or my thoughts, like my voice, are coming out of nowhere and disappearing again. And this is who I am, this open space, and this is who we all are, you see. So I don't know what you're thinking, Sam, or what you're feeling, but I'm convinced you're the same indivisible space containing your particular view, you see. So now when we open our eyes, well, what really changes? The space is full of colors and shapes, magic, but one is still this single space that contains everything. So that's pointing out the obvious.
Yeah, well, that was a great tour. So let's start with the place we started with, the open-eyed considerations of pointing at one's own face and noticing that there's nothing to see. And I want to just try to channel the skepticism that some listeners may feel. And this may be the kind of thing you've heard a lot, but and if you can think of other challenges that don't occur to me, feel free to raise them. But I can imagine someone saying, well, of course I can't see my face. I can't see my own eyes, but I know they're there, right? And so what's the significance of this? You seem to be suggesting that there's something profound about the eye not being able to see itself, but I know I have a head, I know I have a face, I know I have eyes in the middle of it. What's the point of this?
Yes, I think there are different ways of approaching this, and I'm really not in the business of trying to persuade or convince anyone for a start. I'm just happy to be this, and if people are interested, I'll respond. But if they are interested, I say, well, you say that my head is here, you see my eyes, and I know you can see it from, say, 3 feet or 6 feet away. But what I am depends on the range, on where you are looking from. And if you come up to me, then you'll see my face, but come closer, you'll see a patch of skin, and come even closer if you've got the right instruments, and you'll find cells, molecules, atoms, particles, almost nothing. And I'm right at zero, and I say, well, absolutely nothing here, but I'm aware and full of everything. So I say, well, of course I've got a head, I've got eyes, but it's a matter of where I keep them. And I keep them out there in the mirror, and I keep them in other people at a range there. I need them, but they're not central. Now, obviously, this is a very different way of appreciating what one is, but it does actually fit with what science says. And what we've done, you see, is accept what everyone tells us about who we are from their point of view and say, well, you must know more about what I am than I do. And what I'm suggesting is my point of view, which is headless, eyeless, tongueless, without anything here, is valid here. And when I touch my head, you say, well, look, you can touch your head. I say, well, for you, I'm touching my head, but for me, my hands disappear, and there are sensations in awareness. And this is taking it as it's given. And if someone doesn't, go along with that, well, there's nothing I can do really. And, this does make sense, but whether someone says yes, no, or maybe to it is rather mysterious to me.
Mm-hmm. This gets to what really are the kind of unique strengths and liabilities of this way of pointing, because I've been convinced for a long time that what Douglas was getting at here, it really is the fundamental insight into selflessness that is provoked in Dzogchen pointing out instruction, or is sought by really every method of meditation, certainly in the East. And it's what the Advaita teachers are talking about, people like Ramana Maharshi.
Mm.
And the thing that the headlessness insight gets at almost uniquely well is how available the glimpse of
Mm.
this quality of consciousness is, how it's right on the
Mm.
surface, how there's really,
Mm.
there's no such thing as depth. There's no
Mm.
place to go deep within through a practice
Mm.
of meditation to see this. What's being pointed out is already true of the nature of awareness. It just has to be recognized, and there's really
Yeah.
no distance to go. But the flip side of that is that people who haven't spent a lot of time meditating and haven't deeply ingrained this search for insight into selflessness may glimpse this thing, very briefly, and not see it as the answer to their search, because they really haven't had a search, and they haven't become connoisseurs of their unenlightenment. And so they don't see that this glimpse of openness and centerlessness immediately balances the equation they've been struggling to solve.
Yes.
And I believe Douglas, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that he once said in some context that the voice of the devil says, "So what?" And do I have that right? Did he notice this as a problem where people would glimpse this and then say, well, so what? And then it was hard to kind of get them past that point.
Well, yes. I mean, you show them their true nature and they go, oh, okay, well, what's on TV tonight? It's astonishing. Douglas was astonished that you could show this and people would not value it. But he took that with a pinch of salt, and he in the end he shared it with so many people. And I think I probably have the same approach. You go around sharing it as widely as you can and affirming everyone's got it, and then you stand back and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And some accept it and some don't. And it's really mysterious and really interesting for that reason. I mean, fascinating. One just goes and shares it and affirms everyone's got it, and that their response, whatever it is, even if it's so what, is valid. And as you go round, gradually, it seems to me, more and more people say yes to it and value it. And that is infectious. And it's a long-term project.
Mm.
But I am part of a community where I can see how powerful that is and how wonderful and how much fun it is. I really don't think one can judge whether someone is ready for it or not. I say everyone is ready, and here you are, do what you like with it.
So let's map this on to a more traditional way of thinking about this, which exists in many places, but I would say Dzogchen has been the most systematic in talking about both sides of this. The seeming paradox of this already being true of the nature of mind, and on that account, you have people from the Zen tradition and the Advaita tradition sometimes speaking as though practice doesn't make any sense because this thing is already true. But the other side of that is a glimpse of this isn't sufficient. That's actually the beginning of someone's practice. And what your job is thereafter is not to seek this as dualistically as though this were some goal that had to be attained, but to get used to this and more used to this.
Yes.
and grow into it so that you're living from that place more and more,
Yeah.
and it becomes more and more obvious such that at a certain point it can't be overlooked. So how do you think about or speak about the difference between an initial glimpse of headlessness and a stabilizing of this glimpse, or
Yes.
a living from that place more and more?
Well, I think it's both ends of the spectrum. I did a workshop just a couple of days ago, and at the end of it, about 40 people, someone said, "But how do I keep this going?" You see, I said, "Well, it's like anything. You've got to practice. And here's something that you can do if you're serious about wanting to get it going." I said, "I want you each day to commit yourself to noticing 3 times when you're with people that it's face to no face. And I want you to sit for 2 minutes and just on your own, quietly, and notice your single eye. And thirdly, I want you, when you're walking down the street, at least once in the day to notice you're still and the scenery moves." It's both. You've got it, you can't lose it, you're home, but you have to practice it. You have to draw on it.
Hmm.
You have to yes, let it into your life. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that doing this in the presence of other people makes it especially vivid because our
Oh, yeah.
sense of separateness is not only visually anchored more than in any other sense domain, but it really is ramified socially, right? So we feel this contraction of self very much in relationship to others, and it's what it's this self-other dichotomy.
Yes.
One could argue it's two sides of a single coin that gets forged at some point in our development. And if you can just imagine the difference between you're looking across, let's say you're sitting in a cafe and you're looking across at somebody else sitting at another table, a stranger, and they're reading a book, say, and they're not aware of you. And then in the next moment, the person looks up and is
Yes.
looking directly into your eyes. And so there's that moment of eye
Yes.
contact
Yes.
with a stranger. And that transition from merely observing someone in the world to feeling in a very visceral way that you are now an object in the world for them. They're aware of you.
Yes. Yes.
For most of us, that heightens this feeling. It's not an accident that we call it, self-consciousness. We become
Yes.
aware that others are looking at us. We sort of project our eyes outward and, objectify ourselves by the direction of their gaze. And if in moments like that, whether you're, looking at a stranger or with more appropriate social cues, actually talking to someone who has
Mm.
invited the relationship, so you could be talking to a friend or whoever. If you look for yourself, if you look for your head in those moments and fail to find it clearly, if there really is just this openness where you thought
Yeah.
yourself to be a moment before, in which the other person
Yes.
is appearing, that can make this non-dual awareness especially vivid.
Absolutely. It, it, it may be helpful just to briefly describe what I think of as the 4
Mm.
stages of development, because it includes discovering the self. So, shall I just do that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so stage 1 is the baby, and I'm using my own language here, but the baby is first person, headless, at large. You have no idea of what you look like. You look at another person, you don't feel under inspection. The eyes don't have that power yet. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is the child, where you're learning language. And through language, you're learning that others can see you. And you're developing the capacity to sort of, in imagination, go out and look back at yourself through their eyes as a thing. And as a child, you're not yet really sure what kind of box you're in. So it's as easy to be a train or a bird as a little boy or girl. And all of these stages are infectious. If you're with a baby, In my language, it's just giving you permission to be headless. It's just open. And if you're with a child, it's giving you permission to be flexible and playful and get down on the floor and be a train, see. Because now you keep growing up, and the feedback through language from society is that 24/7, you are what you look like. You are the one in the mirror. Look, there's your face. That's what you are at center. We can see it. You can't, but trust us. And so you learn to see yourself as others see you, and profoundly identify with that, and act as if you're behind a face, and act as if they are behind a face there. So now when you look at someone and they look at you, as you're saying, you feel looked at. That's a kind of learned thing. And you're doing the same. So you're communicating, I'm in a body, you're in a body. I can see you, you can see me. And you feel looked at. So that's the third stage, which is infectious. You walk into a room and everybody's doing it. So someone looks at you, you feel looked at. You're a thing. Now, potentially the fourth stage is when you reawaken to your own point of view, which, as you said, is headless. And you are space for the world. And when you look at someone else, now here's the little experiment to do. They turn their gaze to you, and normally you feel, put on the spot and looked at and thinged. Now you can look at that gaze and see it's directed into nothing, like you were saying. And so what sort of put you in the box, someone else's gaze, is now an opportunity to see that you're not in the box. And this fourth stage is as infectious as all the others. And so when you're with friends who are enjoying being headless, of course, we're still feeling looked at, but at the same time, we're aware that we're space for each other. And I hope that this is, I've got, I have many friends I share this with, and it's wonderful to finally bring into the public domain awareness of our true nature. And many people find that, a friend who's a guitarist, and he said as soon as he saw this and he went and performed, he suddenly wasn't on stage. He was space for the audience.
Yeah.
And, it's very healing in lots of kinds of ways.
It's healing in precisely the way that mindfulness is healing, because it is a kind of mindfulness of the centerlessness of awareness. I mean, you're taking that as your object of mindfulness rather than any other object of consciousness.
Yes.
So it has the effect of, for those moments where you're aware of this, you're not identified with thought, you're not clinging to the pleasantness of experience or pushing unpleasant experience away. You're simply this openness in which whatever is appearing is appearing. And so it's got its own intrinsic equanimity and serenity to it. You're just recognizing this quality of consciousness. So when you teach people about this, do you talk about being lost in thought as the obstacle to seeing this in the next moment? I mean, how much of your discussion of this has a similar character to the way in which we tend to talk about practice of mindfulness or meditation generally?
I think they dovetail perfectly, really. I suppose one slightly different angle maybe is that I talk about placing your mind, placing your thoughts. So normally we think of thoughts somehow at the center here in the mind, in our head. But when you are mindful, they're just objects, like you're saying, really. And they're out there with the table and with everything else. So your mind is at large, and there's no mind here. And the mind loves it. It's very freeing. To see your mind is the world, is big. The thoughts and feelings don't affect your no mind. They don't affect this space. But you're not in denial, and you experience the whole range of things. They're wonderful. But they're there and not here, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the way I have put that before is that the world you see with your open eyes is the same place where you're thinking and feeling.
Exactly.
And I mean, you can actually see that, at least visually, you can see that in just superimposing a visual image onto the physical world you're looking at, right? So it's just,
Yes.
people can do that with a greater or lesser degree of vividness, but something happens there. If you're staring at your table and you imagine a very small horse and carriage on it, right? So something
No.
there is different than when I say, imagine an elephant on it. And that superimposition of something shows you that your visual mind is, in some basic sense, before your eyes. And we just know, as a matter of
Yeah.
the underlying neurology, this is all happening in the same place.
And I mean, that really opens up some profound things because, I mean, how on earth you actually imagine an elephant? I mean, it just
Hmm.
pops up out of nowhere, right? I mean, it's just extraordinary. But it pops up in the same place as the
Right.
table. And so I say, well, the whole thing is popping up out of the great void. Now, this is magical. It is, yes. One pays attention because it's so interesting.
Do you have any specific instructions for people when they look at their face in a mirror? 'Cause that seems like a very good. You can do that
Yes,
on
well,
demand in a way that you can't necessarily get someone to make sustained eye contact with you on demand. What practice would you recommend there?
well, very similar to as you do on your app. I would say, okay. I mean, we always do this in the workshop. I take mirrors, and you get people to hold the mirror out in their, arm's length in their hand. And you just simply say to them, well, on present evidence, where's your face, you see? Well, it's there in the mirror, and there isn't one at the near end of your arm, so to speak. And so just as your space for another person, face to no face, so you are with your image in the mirror, with yourself, which is a rather compassionate thing
Mm.
to do, actually. And you can say to people, all right, well, I mean, the mirror's telling you what you look like, this evening, but it's also telling you where your face is. And so I get people to bring it up towards them and see how it changes. And you've got to keep it at arm's length to see it. Well, then I might say, well, imagine we had a big, long mirror and I held it on the other side of the room where you could see your whole body. Now imagine one on the moon. What would you see? You'd see your planetary face. So the mirror is showing you where you keep your appearances. I've got a planetary face out at that range. I've got my human individual face at about 3 feet, and no face at center. And, when you're growing up, you're taught to sort of reach into the mirror. I take people through this. I say, so imagine, looking in the mirror. Now imagine reaching in and getting hold of that face, pulling it out towards you, flipping it the other way around because it's facing the wrong way, enlarging it because it's too small, and imagine putting it on. Now those are the tricks you learn to do as you grow up in order to get this idea you're behind a face. That's where you get it from, plus what others say. But you don't actually do it. It's imagination. And when you actually look, I mean, you've got that going, and that enables you to function as a separate individual, which I think is terribly important. I'm not at all in favor of denying that. There's room for both. So you've got that going, but now that's your sort of public self. But privately, now you say, oh, my face is over there in the mirror.
Mm.
See, I'm not like that here. And that face is growing older, but the space here doesn't grow older. Now, this is, a fantastic meditation.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this emphasis and practice is that it seems to bypass a pitfall that many of us have noticed in ordinary mindfulness, because ordinarily with mindfulness, you're being taught to become more and more aware of the kind of the micro changes in physiology. Maybe most people start with the breath and become very aware of your body and ultimately appearances in mind, thoughts and feelings, intentions. And so what this
Right.
approach does is anchor mindfulness to simply openness and free attention in particularly in those moments
Yes.
of social interaction, whereas you have no attention on yourself because you can't find yourself. You're simply the space
Yes.
of free attention in which this other person is appearing moment to moment.
Yes. Yes. I don't think that the Headless Way bypasses any of these challenges, by the way. I think that one still has to work through all
Mm.
kinds of things. But, yes. But this is life, isn't it? Life is full of challenges. I mean, about 15 years ago, after being with the Headless Way for, 35 years, I suddenly began getting panic attacks. And that was rather shocking. And I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack, but it's rather
Yeah.
disturbing. It's out of your control. And what I realized this panic attack was about was fear of others. It was feeling separate. It went right, finally, I suppose, looking back, this deep sense of separation that I'd sort of managed in the space, erupted. And I didn't really know what to do, but except I did know what to do, just remain open and inquire and pay attention and trust and all that. But, I tried various strategies, there are no others, there are no others, there are no others, there's no self. It doesn't work, you can only go so far. And then so, and in the end, the way I found myself through this was I can't get rid of this sense of others and self. I've been trying. I can't do it. And I accepted it. And of course, I could see that accepting this sense of separation didn't disturb the space. It was in the openness. It was yet another thing arising. And I'd been trying to get rid of it. Well, of course, what you resist persists. And as soon as I began to accept it, actually something wonderful came out of it, which was a profound valuing of the otherness of people and of the self within the one. The one was many, and the many were one. And I didn't have to try and cancel out the many in order to be the one. So I'm saying this that, I think that even when you're seeing who you are, perhaps even more so, it shines a light everywhere in the end, and it doesn't let you off anything. But these, what seem to be such difficult, strange things, God, why is this happening to me? They teach one something about the world that nothing else could teach. And this sense of, the world is me, profoundly me, yet it is profoundly other, is glorious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because it does get at a distinction that the Buddhists really emphasize, to a point of pedantry, it seems in the end. But I think the distinction is important, which is the difference between asserting the oneness of what remains when you're no longer taken in by the subject-object perception, and not asserting, anything. Really, essentially, is the notion of emptiness.
Right.
So it's not even one. It's not one. It's not many. There is simply this unity of cognition and appearances. Right. It's and so there's no.
Yes.
Many of us have experienced this at various points in practice, and certainly met people who seem to be stuck in this place of kind of reifying an experience of oneness. And there's a kind of a subtle undercurrent of conceptualization continually happening there that's going unrecognized.
Yes, you have to sort of work through those things, don't you? And in a workshop, one of the good things about doing a workshop is that there are lots of people there, and they can see that people react in different ways. And so you'll get someone who is going, wow, everything's in me, there's only one. And someone else goes, well, I can't see my head, but I don't get that. And my job at that point is to say, you've got it. You're just having a different experience, and it will change. And, in effect, you don't get stuck in anything, really. And so sometimes I will say, if you wake up tomorrow morning after the workshop and you think, what on earth was all that about, all those experiments, don't try and remember. Look again now. Don't try and hold on to any feeling of oneness or whatever it was. Just be clueless, like right now for me. Pay attention and see what's happening. Yeah. And this is life unfolding. This is living. This is glorious. This is spontaneous and unpredictable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Richard, is there anything that we haven't covered here that you think would be useful for people to recognize what we're talking about and work with it?
Well, I'm aware we've just got audio. It's like, speaking on the phone. And one of my jobs in my life has been a psychotherapist. I've done a lot of counseling and a lot of it on the phone. And why I say it is that, I don't talk about the Headless Way on the phone. They haven't come for that. They might come for 6 sessions because they're suffering bereavement or ill health, whatever. Anyway, what I do is I just be the silence and I listen to their voice and my voice. And so what I'm paying attention to is 2 voices, like now, yours and mine, in the one consciousness. And obviously I know my voice is, this is my voice and that's your voice. But from the point of view of my true nature, they're both mine. Now, this means, in a certain sense, that I position myself right where you are or where the client is, and I'm looking out of the same space, and trying to feel my way into their world. Now, I find that people sort of recognize that instinctively because you're on their side. And so I'm saying this, that in my experience, this has so many applications in everyday life, and it's exciting and interesting. Yeah,
that's an interesting way to frame it, because when you put it like that, it can become obvious that when I'm hearing you speak, I'm hearing your thoughts for the first time. I don't know what you're going to say next, but the truth is I'm in the same position with respect to my own thoughts.
Yes.
Right? I don't know what I'm going to think until the thought itself appears. And when I'm speaking like this, unless I've been, thinking and preparing what I was going to say and kind of waiting for you to stop talking so that I could insert what I had already thought out, the normal experience is to simply be thinking out loud. To be hearing my utterance precisely when you hear it. So I stand in the same relationship to both of our utterances, which is to merely hear them for the first time when spoken.
And it's magical.
Yeah.
It's magical. They're just coming out of the no mind or the silence or consciousness, whatever you want to call it, and going back in. How does that happen? It's just, yes. And it's so intimate, isn't it? 2 voices in one consciousness.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to bring your voice to this conversation. If people want to reach out or find one of your workshops or get your books, where would you direct them online?
Well, our website is headless.org. And if people are interested in joining any of our online video meetings, they can just contact me through the website, and all our books are on the website, and information about workshops. So feel very welcome to get in touch with me through the website, I suppose.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
And thank you, Sam. Often I get people, many times people saying, "Oh, I heard about you through Sam Harris."
Oh, great.
Yeah, so really lots of friends come to workshops or contact me online, and it's through reading your book or your excellent app or the podcast. And so I just want to appreciate how you have, well, thank you for that.